I hope y'all are doing well today. My name's OCD, and in this video, I'm going to be breaking down and reacting to Lil Tracy's newest music video for Knight in Shining Armor. Now, as a disclaimer, I do have a bit of a bias, being that I did the entirety of the VFX throughout this video. However, I'm going to critique myself as harshly as possible with the intention of providing you guys with the most information that I can. Now, I learned a lot from this video, and I hope that there's something to take away for at least one of you. So feel free to comment if you learned something and any other techniques that you'd like me to dive deeper into. Let's get on into it. Gotta love Miggy's intro. I don't know who created it, but the character animation is sick. Now, starting off with this first shot, we've already got some issues. The first issue being the explosion does not actually match the size of the building itself that I am exploding. And throughout this entire video, I feel that the chromatic aberration used was a bit more intense than it should have been. So if I were to do something differently, I would not have created a universal chromatic aberration as if it was a one-size-fits-all, but rather paying specific attention to each shot and the focal length of that lens specifically to ensure that the lens distortion and chromatic aberration match in a consistent way. I also think that there's a bit of a layering issue happening where the explosion is clearly in front of the meteor and the debris flying out is clearly in front of the explosion itself. In an ideal world, the meteor would have been flying through the explosion and the debris would have been bursting out of the volumetrics. However, being that there were certain implications of this project specifically, such as time and budget, you have to do what you have to do to get the entire video done. I only had 6 or 7 days to complete 60 plus VFX shots. And that is a main point that I would like to drive throughout this channel. Sometimes you need to sacrifice some things for other things, being that there are certain variables outside of your control, whether it be a creative difference from you and the director or an implication from the label that you're working with. You need to know how to adapt and do what you can to get a final result on the deadline. Now, I'm a big fan of the falling through the hellscape clouds. However, there are still a few things that I would have done differently. I don't feel like there is enough interactive lighting going on from Tracy in the environment itself. So if I could have been on set as a supervisor, I would have wanted to blast Tracy with a red hot light to really feel like he was immersed in that background. This also would have helped with the edges of the light wrap specifically, being that it wouldn't all be digital, but some of the edges could have been preserved. Another thing that I would have liked to have done differently is actually placing Tracy into a 3D scene. This would have allowed the light to pass through the volumetrics of the clouds and break through, so the thinner parts had some hot spots and the thicker parts blocked out the light. Why this works has to do with the glow, glint, glare, and surface imperfections of the lens itself to really mend the two together as if it was actually shot through a lens into the sensor of a camera. And which camera are you shooting it onto? What lens is it being filmed onto? What's the focal length and the f-stop or the shutter speed? With this shot here, there is a bit of a problem going on with the tracking itself. The reason why the tracking is off is due to me using a point track rather than a 3D track. And you can utilize this if there is minimal parallax. However, being that the surface is spread so wide, you would need to do a 3D camera track to ensure that that plane actually stayed in position. Whereas with this shot, the track starts to slip, especially noticeable around the edges. Now here with a lot of sky replacements, we are having a bit of an issue. I didn't actually utilize the refined soft matte tool or matte choker, so therefore there is a bit of a blue outline around the leaves specifically. A reason why this is happening is because the sky was sunny and clear and we are replacing it with an overcast sky. This means that the light shooting through the leaves and the branches creates this hot spot that wouldn't actually happen. Now, before we get into the fire, I would like to say that it was a creative decision to maintain the consistency of a red flame that matches the hellscape that we were flying through. It isn't necessarily realistic to how a fire would look if it was actually being burned. But that's the beauty of working in visual effects, is that you get to decide what reality you are creating and how the effects live within that reality. So at the end of the day, the vision, the story, and what you're trying to project onto the audience is what matters more than realism. But ideally, it feels right. Again, here we are lacking in interactive lighting. Without a clear intention of where you are going to place the fire after the fact and planning for that in the production process, rather than relying on it in post, you are going to have a much more seamless result. In this shot, the roof elements are not exactly perfectly color matched. As you can see, there is an inconsistency in terms of the highlights, so I would have kept a weather eye on whether or not the highlights matched. You have some colder spots that appear to be peaking and some hotter spots that aren't peaking enough, as well as on the roof elements specifically, the blacks are getting crushed in a way that wouldn't actually happen in real life, and that is due to me trying to replicate from the ashing that would happen from the ceiling being burned. As for the hallway shots, I'm a big fan, except for one thing. There is a shot that comes up here next where the background of Tracy is lit on fire, and the following shot does not have fire on Tracy's back. So a lack of continuity across the board is something that I would have wanted to do differently. Now these next three shots are actually amongst some of my favorite of the meteor shots. What I did for the meteor effect was I simulated inside of Blender. I exported as an open VDB where I imported that VDB into a new project. I pointed the camera from the perspective that my real world camera was facing, and I then rendered it out onto a 2D card. I imported that 2D card inside of After Effects where I applied a 3D camera track and all of my other compositing. This technique is known as 2.5D, and it is insanely efficient on your machine. I recommend if you are on a time crunch and you need to get renders spit out, you can create a few variations, tracking them based off specific camera animations, and then changing the perspective of your 3D camera to re-render the shot if need be so it matches a bit. That's the only problem with 2.5D is as you twist around it, you start to reveal that it is in fact a 2D card. If you'd like to avoid this, you could simply just import the OpenVDB into a new project, do the camera tracking inside of Blender, and then render from each shot specifically. This is more time intensive and machine intensive, but it definitely gives off a better result. All of these rooftop shots were a bit of a hassle. The reason being, they all have sky replacements, they all have meteors going on, they have interactive debris, and birds flying throughout the scene. They did not track easily, and I had to use multiple methods to be able to get them to track, including 5 different point tracks because I couldn't get a 3D track to solve inside of Blender or After Effects, and I don't have synth eyes, but I'm sure that would have helped me. So if you have synth eyes, good for you, but I suffered through this one because I didn't. Might be an investment for the future. These are the other meteor shots that I was a big fan of. However, here we still have the same layering happening where the explosion is clearly on top of the meteor and the debris is clearly on top of that as well. Again, if I just duplicated the explosion, cut out a certain piece and feathered it a bunch, I could have added a bit more immersion, but I was streamlining this process, trying to get as many shots done as possible. Some of these shots taking more time than other shots. But a big fan of these two shots here. So if I would have done something differently on these shots here, I would have wanted to accentuate the lighting behind Tracy by making that room behind him the most engulfed in flames, and the room that he's actually standing in should feel hot, but not actually on fire. Maybe you have embers, maybe you have the wall breaking through as if it is being deteriorated from the outside in, trying to just add any types of distortion and all of the things. However, in this instance, you are seeing a big hot mess and it doesn't actually point your eyes towards Tracy at all. If anything, you're probably looking here on the right and then maybe you scan over to the left, but you might even start on the left and then scan to the right. And ideally, your first point of focus should be on the subject that you are trying to capture. Overall, we have some roto issues, this being because of using Runway ML. Again, you can't really rely on some of these AI tools to cut out your subject from your background. Some of them work in conjunction with other tools, but I found that it actually took more work to clean up the AI's roto than to just do the roto the old-fashioned way. Now, as you can see in this shot here, we are lacking textural variety in terms of the lighting, specifically on this dust asset to the left. Now, if I would have noticed this, I would have added more reactive and immersive lighting, so there should be some dark spots and some hot spots, but the hot spots should have been few and far between. I will say that I think this video came out better than I could have ever imagined it to be, being that I had to pull multiple all-nighters in order to get this done, as well as not actually knowing if I could pull off the simulated meteor effects and get a result that didn't look like absolute dog water. This is the worst shot in the entire video. I think overall the fire is way too hot here and I should have been more subtle with it. I'm kind of okay with the way that the fire looked on the outside there, and then we have this nice smooth pull out, and that is the end of the video. The main mistake I made throughout this video is a lack of time management. If I were to have done this differently, I would have focused on the easy shots first and getting those to at least 80% before continuing on to the shots that were more complicated that I wanted to do. However, I was concerned that I wouldn't be able to get a realistic enough result for the simulation on the meteor itself, so I was focused on learning that. But this put me in a bottleneck, being that I had to rush out all of the shots because I spent so much time focusing on what I wanted to do, which was the simulations, which also happens to be my favorite part about 3D in general. I'm a big simulation head, and I got lost in the sauce of having fun, which I think that is important to enjoy what you are doing, but you also have to understand a time and a place, and when you are on a deadline of a week, you just need to get the shots done. The second biggest lesson that I learned from working on this video is to believe in your abilities. You would be surprised what you are able to accomplish, especially in states of pressure. I knew nothing about adding noise textures or variation in the animation of your emission objects specifically. There are so many different avenues that I have now figured out due to this video specifically. And without that blind optimism, I never would have gotten the opportunity to finally refine those skills and learn what I needed to learn. Sometimes it takes a project like this to really push what you know to be possible, and you will grow from it. So be optimistic and ready to fall headfirst over and over and over again with the hope that maybe you will stand back up and actually rejoice in your glory. Now, the third thing that I learned from working on this video is to have an open dialogue with everyone on board that you are working with. I was so focused on trying to appease the director that I was ignoring communication because it wasn't working out and I didn't know how to tell him that. However, in this case, it managed to work. I think that with communication, we would have possibly been able to push the deadline another day or two, which would have allowed me to do even better work and focus on refining the errors in some of these shots. Now, the final thing that I learned is that I will always be able to do better, and so can you. There is no such thing as a perfect artist, and we are all here to learn and do our very best and create what we feel. Now, if you guys are interested in a tutorial showing how to do the meteor simulation inside of Blender, feel free to leave a comment down below and I will get to it as soon as possible. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to drop a like down below. New videos every single Thursday, assuming I finally stick to that schedule. Again, I really appreciate you guys for your endless patience and support. I swear, as I get settled into this new space, we are going to get these consistent uploads rolling, and I'm gonna actually have these videos posted in the morning rather than the evening, or even days later. So subscribe for that, hit the bell. Until next time, seize the day and keep learning.